Welcome to the I Am the Worst Parent Ever podcast with Nicole Merritt and Dr. Robert Zeitlin.
Hey, Robert.
Hey, Nicole.
How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm busy. My kids have a lot of activities.
Yeah.
When your kids are older now, but when they were younger, did you guys overschedule them?
Yeah, it's their job to overschedule themselves now. But when they were younger, did we overschedule them? Not excessively, but I do remember this moment. It was one of those parenting shame moments when I was sitting in like my daughter's middle school awards, and she was getting an award for Spanish or something, that she stood out for. And you hear these kids' names, they're getting called up for every award. And then there was this one award we thought that she was up for, and this other girl, it's like, man, you see those kids growing up and those parents drove those kids really hard. Like a couple of those kids, like they were self-motivated, but a lot of those times it felt like these were managed lives. Like these kids worked really hard for these awards at like 12 years old. Right. And I couldn't help sitting there as my daughter was like not getting these awards thinking, maybe we didn't do a good enough job. Maybe we should have been pushing harder or scheduling more. And I really had that moment of like, we kind of failed her. It felt like.
Can I ask you, was she happy with the one award she got?
She was a little disappointed with the award she didn't get, but she was excited about that award.
Then I don't think you failed. I don't think you failed in the least.
I agree. And I can say, looking at it now back, now we're talking 6 years since middle school. It's clear we did not fail. It's clear that she found her own pace, her own things to do, her own interests. And I think even more, if I was following what I thought was right to do back then we would have overscheduled for her, and she might have had a harder time finding the things that she wanted to do as opposed to the things that we thought she should do.
Right. So I'm an admitted overscheduler. You and I have talked before. Part of it is for my kids, and part of it is selfishly for me. But I overschedule us. I like us to have a plan for the day. I like us to be going from this activity to that activity, because when I'm home and in the house, everything that I haven't done stares me in the face, right? But I'm also very much a proponent for your children developing their interests organically. I actually wrote a piece about it on my site, and Good Men Project and Ravishly later syndicated it. But if your child enjoys the activities that they are overscheduled in, and that they're not overly tired when they go to school the next day, or they're not messing up here or doing this, I think it's okay. I think it's okay to have certain days where you're going from back to back thing if it's something they enjoy and the benefit is outweighing the cons. But the key is that they have to enjoy it. It can't be forced. It can't be something pushed upon them.
There was that scene in the movie Bad Moms where she's driving her daughter to Mandarin lessons, and her daughter's like, everyone just cries in Mandarin. It's just horrible. She goes, well, you like it, don't you? She goes, no. She's like, well, why are we going? Like at some point, like my kids were a little older than yours when they started to state their own preference. Yeah. And at some point, this is a sort of business term, but what's the sunk cost? Like, when are you going to give up the fact that you spent 5 years chasing that black belt, and you're going to give up like 2 belts short?
Right. Or, even the actual cost, like monetary costs, like my kids are young enough to where, they want to try something like soccer or basketball. We enroll them in the YMCA basketball program, we go, the first practice and the child doesn't like it and cries the whole time and screams the whole time. Now, this is our Saturday morning, every Saturday at 8 a.m. because you wanted to do it and we paid for it. admittedly, I will make my child try it at least 2 or 3 times. It's not like, hey, you go out there and figure it out and handle it. I'm right there next to him while he's trying to bounce the ball too. But you have to, I think, give it a fair go and then know when to back off. But you have to push your children a little bit, because if you don't, then I think fear would set in and they'd never try anything that challenges them even a little bit.
You're giving me flashbacks, Nicole, actually, to him not liking basketball for a couple times and it's not my flashback at all. And we raised a son and a daughter. So I keep talking about my daughter, but there was this one thing that was a non-negotiable for us, which was they were going to learn how to swim.
Oh.
And sometimes that comes easier than others. And in my daughter's case, it was not easy. And there were a lot of tears and a lot of screaming and a lot of crying. And my wife just persisted. We together we persisted, but she was the one who had to take her to the lesson and sit there as she's screaming and crying. And fortunately, it was with an individual instructor, and he knew, well, first we tried the group thing that got us just so far. And he knew what he was dealing with, and he was, he had been around the block a couple of times. But there was a time about 2 or 3 lessons in when he turned to my wife, he's like, "We're still doing this, right?" And she's like, "Yeah, we're still doing it." And she looks back, my daughter looks back at that life lesson as being huge, as working through her fears and knowing that she could figure out how to swim. I was just on a paddleboard in the middle of a lake with her this weekend as she dared to slip off the paddleboard and get in the water. And that never would have happened if my wife, and God bless him, Donald, the instructor, and my daughter hadn't persisted through that season of learning how to swim. And, if that falls in overscheduling, I think that falls in the non-negotiable category.
Right. And we almost, and I guarantee you a lot of parents have the same swimming story, because I have the same thing too. When my oldest was going and she didn't want to go, and she would cry and scream every single day, and she would, mine are so dramatic, they'll cry to the point of almost vomiting. They want you to know how upset they are. And it took everything for me. The swim place where we go, there's I watch from a window, from behind a window. And to see my baby screaming so hard, "Mommy, Mommy," for me not to break through that window and go. But I sat there and watched her teacher bring her to this other place where she stopped crying. He got her out of it. But my first instinct was, I gotta get in there. I gotta get in there. But I let it happen. And now, she swims laps in the pool. But yes, swimming is a non-negotiable. There's too many pools and too many bodies of water around to not have that. But when it's dance, when it's soccer, when it's basketball, when it's art, is it okay to run around all day from activity to activity? You gotta see if it's working for your child and with your child.
There's 2 ways I want to take this, and the second way will be a separate episode. But here's what it is. We're Jewish, and in the Bible, there's also the Talmud, which are sort of lessons that come from the Bible, the Torah. And one of the lessons in the Talmud is this edict to parents: you shall teach your children to swim. Believe it or not, right? A religious text. But why? Because, and this psychologist wrote this wonderful book called The Blessing of a Skinned Knee. You might have heard of it.
No.
Her name is Wendy Mogul. But the idea is, if you don't ever have your kid in a challenging situation like that, or are you really preparing them for life? And we'll have a separate episode on that. But the other direction I wanted to go is our evolution as parents, from not jumping up the second our kid made a sound on the baby monitor to go rescue them from what felt like a fate worse than death, to letting them cry it out a little so they can fall asleep, to standing behind the glass at swimming. There's an evolution that you've lived through as a parent to get to this point where you know your kid's going to be okay. You trust their resilience. You trust them, and it helps grow their resilience.
Right. And I think with regards to the overscheduling, you're going to have, I think it's okay to have seasons of it. We'll have a busy couple of months where it seems like we're doing too much, or to other people we are doing too much. but it's working for our family. And then there'll be lulls where we don't have an every Saturday activity at 8 a.m. So I think it's okay to ride those waves and take part in those seasons. Question for you: have you come into any research that says whether overscheduling or having more, kind of free play is beneficial to kids?
I'm not familiar with the research, but I am familiar with the ongoing debates, especially the academic ones. Like there's a high flying, very competitive, high level school district near us, and I won't name names, but they started to realize how much stress kids were under, and they put a whole new homework policy and a testing policy in place. And the superintendent went out on a limb and said, this is just made an executive order. This is what we're going to do. This is for the well-being of our kids and the balance of them. And parents in that district actually rose up and said, we didn't move here for less work. And so there's a parent drive for this kind of overscheduling or maxing out. And I think there's definitely, like, in some cases, there's cultural differences on like how hard you should be working as a kid, in certain families, if you're going to achieve X or Y. And I don't know the research well, but I can tell you from my experience working in an area where there's a lot of highly successful families, a lot of money and a lot of advantage and a lot of privilege and a lot of kids with a lot of aspirations, that a lot of kids are getting sick. A lot of kids are not dealing well with that pressure and that stress. And they're finding ways to adapt to it. And sometimes they're growing up a little too fast, or sometimes they're leaning on things, whether it's, medication or other things to help them get through what's a totally man-made challenge, and over, not just over scheduling, but over stressing, that feels, to me, at least from my perspective, like it's mostly fear-based and anxiety-based about the future, but I don't know all the reasons that parents do all that stuff.
Yeah, I wrote an article a while back on like the 10 most important considerations when you put your child into school. And of course mine are little, so, but when my daughter was going into kindergarten seemed like, as important as where she went to college, and
at that time it was.
Right. But so much of what I think is the most important thing is that you are finding the right school for your child and for your family's sense of values and what you are comfortable with as a family for the workload. The school where my daughter goes, at least in kindergarten and first grade, homework was optional, which is fine. That's the school's policy, but they would send it home and it was optional. In my house, it's not optional. Like, we're going to do it every month. So you can have that, kind of rule that is in place wherever they are attending, but you also in your home can have your own sense of rules and values about what gets done and what needs to get done. And if you feel like your child needs more work, then you give them, the extra math workbook or whatever it is that the school's not providing. I definitely think that there has to be, as we always talk about, just an appropriate balance. You don't want to push your kids and force them to do things they don't like and push them too hard and make success the be all end all, but there has to be enough kind of nudge, to make sure that they don't, kind of fall to the side.
Or through the cracks. And so I think one of the big concerns that I have, and obviously in my position, I end up hearing these stories more than most, but the parents who come to me and say, it wasn't until 10th or 11th grade that I realized my kid had a learning disability, or it wasn't, we were fighting to keep him in X and Y school, and he was really trying to tell us all that time it wasn't right for him. It wasn't until we started to listen to what was right for him or her that that everything changed. Then we realized, we took our foot off the pedal, or we changed lanes, and I think one of the risks that you're talking about is not just falling by the wayside, but actually not seeing what your kid needs. And if they're screaming out for something other than maybe swimming lessons, then maybe it's worth an extra look or a thought, maybe we should try something different.
Right. As parents, do you think it comes from our place of anxiety and worry and fear, that if we don't overschedule and if little Johnny is not going to this, that, and the other thing, that I don't know, he's gonna lean more towards destructive behaviors? Like, am I using this to keep my child in line? Do you think?
I mean, little Johnny, this is little Johnny's first time in third grade, but it's also our first time being a parent. So same way he's looking around and trying to figure out what you're supposed to be doing in third grade, we're looking around trying to figure out what are you supposed to be doing as a parent. And that's one of the reasons you and I launched this, is because we keep having these conversations with parents, and like, no one has any good resources. There are these books that are like 400 pages on academic that aren't helping anyone. And then, you don't have any real talk advice. But as parents, it's hard to look around and say, oh, or your kid comes up to you and goes, thanks, everyone else was in ballet class, but you didn't know to schedule me for that. Or like, yeah. It's hard to deal with those pressures as a parent too, even though we're grown up and we should be able to handle it more.
Right. Yeah. So I tried to think of I don't know what I would call, am I an overscheduler? Am I opposed to free play? And what I kind of came up with, what I think is the balance, and what I am or strive to believe I am, is a flexible overscheduler. And I think that kind of therein lies the balance, or a modified, more free range parent. You're not full-fledged helicopter. You're not full-fledged free range. You're not always overscheduled. You're not always never having a schedule or a plan. And I think that our children, it's the same thing with the life buffet. Like, if you're not going out of your home or scheduling them to try something, are they getting that part of the buffet, or are they avoiding, the meal that they might not like? So I think there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, no, I think it's also hard as parents, even if you're not dealing with pressure or fear, to see all the opportunities that are out there for our kids, and to have to pass up on some of them. Like, growing up, I don't remember having to choose so hard between I'm going to be committed to soccer and I'm going to be doing travel soccer. And so then I can't ever learn karate, or I can't ever, I won't be around for piano lessons, but nowadays kids are having to choose, and parents are having to choose for their kids really young about committing to one thing or the other. And that's the other pressure on parents, is like, wow, if I choose this, then they're never going to have the opportunity to learn this or to try that out. And it's like, what if they suddenly turn an interest? I think the big challenge in this overscheduling question is, if we're following your advice from before of how do you schedule your kids even heavily on stuff that they like, what happens, like we said before, when they don't like it? Are you set up to be able to pivot and change directions if your kid suddenly says, tomorrow I'm all about parkour, or I really want to try gymnastics? It's like, well, we're not going to try every new thing that comes up every week, but are you willing to pivot? Right.
And I think you have to be, or you're doing your children a disservice. I think that, there might be those that are listening saying, I can't afford to do all these activities, but I will tell you, there are so many free activities in communities. You just have to take the time to seek them out. And so many places that offer ballet class or basketball, they have scholarships to help if you look into it. So it's not to say your kids need to be enrolled in all these expensive, fancy things. No, the library, where we go to the library, our public library, every Tuesday and Wednesday this summer, they have free events that we go to, the science of the sounds of nature, science experiments. You just have to be willing to find them, but they don't have to always cost you money.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I think sometimes people, parents get overwhelmed at the cost of activities and at the time it's going to take them, and how am I going to get and I'll tell you, I wonder in the fall how I'm going to get everybody where they need to go so that each of my children can have something to participate in. But you make it work, because the whole point of those activities are to help your children grow.
That's great. And I'm gonna bookend my story about my daughter learning to swim and say on the other side, there's times where your kids want to do something and you're like, I really don't think you should do that. But if you're listening to your kids, so at some point, the basketball league my daughter was playing in, yeah, my son really had activities too. It wasn't all my daughter. But the basketball league she was playing in my mind, started getting a little rough. Like the referees weren't doing their job, and girls were getting like, it was getting a little aggressive. And I thought, yeah, I don't think I want her playing next year. And she came to me and she's like, we're signing up for basketball again, right? And I'm like, I was thinking about that. And remember last year that girl got hurt and I don't think it's really that safe. And she's like, I can handle it. Like there are times where your kids are going to be like, want to do that, right. try that new thing or free thing, or stick with something, even though it doesn't feel totally 100% safe to you. I mean, trust your gut. But in that case, she was like, you're being overprotective and I can handle it. So like she played one more season. She had a great time. It set her up so she could handle other challenges. You don't necessarily know what experiences your kids are collecting along the way, in what direction they're heading in life. We can try to predict that and shape that. But I hate to say this to parents, but it's a fool's errand. Your kids are going to head the direction that they're intended to head. We can shape it as much as we want, but ultimately they're going to end up choosing it. So follow their lead as much as possible. I mean, at some age, you need to listen a little harder.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Follow their lead, be a flexible overscheduler, let them find what they love organically and just support them fully.
It's great. Good talking to you, Nicole.
Thank you for listening to the I Am the Worst Parent Ever podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss an episode.